The 2025 T-Fight line is Tecnifibre's masterpiece. These are some of the best rackets I've ever reviewed, checking off basically every single box. For one, the stability to maneuverability ratio is simply off the charts. So as you can see, I've made a graph. Stability we have on the x-axis. Some rackets are not very stable, so they're closer to the origin point, like the Blade 98, but on the bright side, they make up for that lack of stability with very high maneuverability. On the other hand, you have rackets that are very torsionally stable, like the Gravity Pro, but it's kind of heavy, so its maneuverability score is pretty low, and generally this is true with most rackets. The more stable you are, probably the heavier you are, and thus the worse your maneuverability score is. We have an inversely proportional relationship. And then there are outliers, like the Pure Aero 98 from Babolat. It has great torsional stability, it's rock solid, but it's also extremely maneuverable. And that's great. That's one of the reasons it's super popular, both on tour, but also one of the best-selling rackets globally. Now, if you're wondering where the T-Fights land on this graph, they're actually off the graph over here. We have the 305S, which is incredibly stable, but also quite maneuverable, and the 300S, which has quite literally broken the maneuverability scale. So between the 300S and the 305S, there are a few key differences. First, this 300S is lighter, but it's also got a 16x19 string pattern. The 305S has some weight added down into the handle here, making it a little bit heavier, but also more head light. And this extra weight gives this frame a little bit more extra power to complement a tighter 18x19 string pattern. There's another key difference that you'll really feel if you hit the two rackets back to back, especially with the same string, and that is an ever so slightly softer flex on the 305S, which gives you a plusher hitting feel, a little bit better ball pocketing, and a tiny bit of extra comfort. And I also do want to clarify what this S suffix means, because there does seem to be a little bit of confusion. So S just means small. It refers to the smaller head size on these 98 square inch rackets, whereas the normal 300 gram 100 square inch T-Fight will just be called the T-Fight 300. So what's new with these T-Fights? Well, for 2025 there have been a few critical changes. Number one, they've redistributed the mass. This is especially true for the 305S. Interestingly, Tecnifibre explicitly says that they are lowering swing weight, which has got to be one of the first times I've ever heard a brand actually address swing weight as a concept. My personal 300S, which is this one, had a strung swing weight of about 320, which is pretty much in line with the specs of the last version. However, my 305S had a much lower swing weight at 325 strung, which is like a 15 to 20 point drop compared to the ISO version we saw last year. And the goal here is to make these rackets easier to swing, mirroring the modern game where swing speed has become everything. Especially if you've watched my ball video, then you'll kind of get a better idea of one of the reasons swing speed has become even more important. Consequence is that these lower swing weights result in lower power and worse stability, but Tecnifibre has actually addressed that as well. So they filled out the beam, increasing the area of the cross section, which effectively does thicken the beam, though you'll get pretty much the same measurements if you go this way, but there's more material going this way. I'll show some photos. And that's just going to give you more power, more stability, more of all the good stuff. So from a market positioning standpoint, these T-Fights are quite unique. The 300S plays a lot like a Radical MP, but more with the spin of an Extreme Pro. And the 305S is kind of in between, like a Strike 98, so it still has this kind of clubbier feel that the Strike has, but it's easier to swing and has more of spin and forgiveness in the range of the Percept 100D, which is pretty crazy because that's a bigger head size racket at 100 square inches. And ultimately, I think these two T-Fights, though, they kind of stand alone in the market for one single reason, and that's how good they feel. The hitting feel on these two T-Fights is absolutely superb, and while between the two they don't really feel identical, they do feel more similar to each other than anything else. If you look at Tennis Warehouse's top 3 selling frames from 2024, they're all quite muted, featuring dampening text designed to filter out vibrations in the name of comfort. And sure, it's really nice to have a comfortable racket, nobody likes arm pain, right? But it's also really nice to feel where you're hitting the ball on the string bed. With Head abusing their auxetic technology, Solinco significantly dampening the feel on their V2 whiteout, and Yonex refusing to give up VDM on their E-zones, these T-Fights have become the most connected feeling 98 square inch rackets in the segment, being some of the most connected feeling rackets on the market as a whole. With both T-Fights, the rackets really tell you where you've made contact on the string bed with a firm, pretty crisp feel that's actually also pretty solid, so it's not hollow, thanks to the foam filling. For me, the hitting feel's gotta be up there with like the current Pro Staff 97, the V1 Solinco whiteout, in terms of how solid yet connected and responsive these two T-Fights are. But comparing the two, I would say, again, there is a minor difference. The 300S with the red strings here is slightly stiffer, shown that with the RA, but it's also slightly crisper and you get a higher pitch hitting noise, so it does feel a little bit more hollow. The 305S on the other hand feels a lot more solid, it's more substantial, and part of this is definitely due to the increased head weight on this 305, but there's also noticeably more ball pocketing from the 18x19 string pattern. And comparing the new 305S to the old ISO 305, I also don't think there's a huge difference. In feel alone, I would say the old one is maybe a tiny bit boardier. Still, it's extremely connected, just like this new one is, but I think this new one has maybe a tiny bit more ball pocketing and a little bit more pop off the string bed, though that not really sure that actually results in more power, especially when you consider the loss in swing weight. But ultimately, I really think the change in feel from ISO to this one is very minor. If you liked the old one, I think you'll like the new one. If you didn't like the old one, or you had comfort issues with the old one, I think you'll probably have the same issues with the new one. Despite the fact that these two frames share the exact same mold, they do feel built for pretty much entirely different players. That's just how big of a difference weight distribution and string pattern can have on the overall playability of a racket. Both respond really well to a variety of swing speeds. In comparison, the Gravity 98 Tour really only plays well when you give the full beans. On the other hand, these T-Fights are forgiving enough to allow the user to guide the ball back into play when necessary, but that said, they definitely play best at full chat. In that way, they remind me a lot of the Pure Aero 98, and yes, you can definitely have success with the Pure Aero 98 at like the 3.5 level, where swing speeds aren't always going to be as high. You get that edge-to-edge sweet spot, you get great stability and amazing consistency from the string bed. You can always trust this racket to respond well to higher swing speeds, so you never have to hold back, and I absolutely love that. In fact, I would say the faster you swing these, the better. Unlike some rackets that are known for being forgiving, that perform really well at lower swing speeds, like the Wilson Clashes, but kind of fall apart as you start to accelerate. Where the 305S and the 300S differ is the type of ball they like to hit. This 300S here is a spin machine. It really helps you realize that EGA endorsement. You can hit great variations in terms of height over the net, ball speeds. You can push heavy topspin loopers or flirt with the lines, going for those sneaky angled shots. Racket head speed comes just so easily. It's fast, easy to use, and pretty forgiving. The 305S, on the other hand, is way better suited, I think, to the advanced players with cleaner, flatter strokes. You can still find some really epic spin with this 305S as well. You'll just have to work a little bit harder to find that, because it does feel like there's quite a bit of head weight on this frame when you just go to swing it. So control is where the 305S really differentiates itself from the 300S, and it's not that the 300S is launchy by nature or especially unpredictable, it's that the 305S has freakishly good control. And when it comes to control, there are two things that I really look for. The first is directional control, so which direction you want to hit it, and the second is depth control, so how well you feel like you can gauge the depth on every shot. And typically denser string patterns do help improve both directional and depth control, and this is definitely true with these T-Fights. The 305S changes direction as well, if not better than any modern racket. This 18x19 string pattern just begs you to take that ball early, cut off cross-court angles, pound balls up the line, do basically whatever you want. I've really felt that on court. Like, my forehand is the less accurate ground stroke between the two, especially for flat shots, and yet I just like, this racket made me want to take balls early, to flatten them out, to go up the line. And then it was even better on my backhand, which is the more controlled, more steady stroke. It felt, I would say, as good as it's ever felt, making the 305S one of my personal favorite two-handed backhand rackets of all time, up there with like the Percept 100D and the Head Gravity Pro. Overall, the 305S, you can pick your spots effortlessly. You never feel like you're really gonna miss long. The launch angle is pretty low, so you can just rip every single ball with a ton of confidence. The 300S, on the other hand, I think does fall behind some of the other 16x19 rackets on the market. For example, I'd say it's a little bit less predictable than the Whiteout V2, probably even behind the Blade 98 and the Radical MP, but the control is still better than like the VCore 98 or the Speed MP if you're cross-shopping head sizes. This is the part of the video where I will make a confession. I have no idea how they made the 305S as stable as it is. Typically, when rackets are extremely stable, it's because they have a high swing weight or a high twist weight, meaning there's a lot of weight on the frame close to where you're actually going to hit the ball. And if they don't use mass to create stability, then they usually have a big oversized head or a super thick beam. But the wacky thing is, these T-Fights, they don't have either of these things. Specifically, this 305S, which I would say plays noticeably more stable than the 300S. Stability-wise, I would say the 300S, probably a little bit more stable than you would expect. It's on par, I think, with its closest rival spec-wise, which is the Radical MP. I think it's more stable, so less twisty on contact than like the EZO 98, but it is behind class leaders like the Aero 98, the Strike 98. The 305S, on the other hand, it is a class leader in its own right. Edge-to-edge sweet spot, it's insane. There's zero twisting on off-center shots. This thing is a total rock. And I knew that we were dealing with that 325 swing weight, right? So I figured, okay, this thing has to have a huge twist weight. But it doesn't. I measured it, strung 13.9. That's way below market average, and that's one of the reasons you can find swing speed so quickly with this racket. There is still a bit of clubbiness going on, so there's something, I think, up with how these frames are being measured or however the mass is distributed, but it's crazy. And again, I will make another admission. I was probably a little bit dramatic with my chart earlier in the video. That was for mostly entertainment purposes. These two still do perform outstandingly in maneuverability to spin ratio, but I would say that the 305S probably doesn't swing quite as fast as like the EZO 98, VCore 98, or Blade 98. It's more in the same kind of realm as like the Aero 98. Stability here, I think, might be better, more in line with the Strike 98 I tested, but that Strike needed a 340 swing weight to get that kind of stability, whereas this one gets it at just 325 strung. Pretty crazy. So string setups and weight customizations. I first tried both of these two T-Fights with the same string setup. My favorite string setup of the moment, which is Toroline Otoro in the mains, restring sync in the crosses at 51 pounds. Strung them both at the same tension to really see how that string pattern behaved, how it changed the launch angle, and it does. This one is quite a bit lower. I do think that string setup worked amazingly for both of these rackets. It retained the T-Fight feel, boosted spin, lasted really long, didn't sacrifice forgiveness or control. But I do always like to try a bunch of different string setups to evaluate rackets. So in the 305S, I threw in Razor Soft, which is actually not soft at all. It did hurt my arm, which is a rarity for me. It wasn't specifically any point on my arm, it was just like my whole arm felt the shock of playing with this kind of setup. felt a lot of fatigue towards like the 1.5 hour mark with these frames. So I swapped the string out for my favorite feeling string of all time, which is Grapplesnake Tour Sniper. Tour Sniper enhances the great directional control that you get with this 305S, a feature that I did also find in Razor Soft, but now we're getting a much plusher, more solid feel, a little extra ball bite from the shape profile as well. I think that was probably my #1 recommended string for this racket. With the 300S, I tried Gamma Sapphire, string I'd never tried before, round, really soft, recommended to me by my good friend Oak at Tennis Warehouse. And I probably should have listened to him and put it in the 305S, because with this it was a bit launchy, a bit erratic, too powerful, not enough ball bite, so I couldn't really trust spin either. So this red string is Tourmaline Wasabi Pomegranate Red, and this really worked well. It brought the feel, because the string is so muted and soft, it brought the feel closer to the 305S, giving it more of a solid plusher feel, which was really great. The spin that you get here was also among the best that I tried in this frame. Really easy to loop balls, but you don't get this loss in directional control that I sometimes do find with Otoro. Really great setup here if you're looking to kind of mute and soften a T-fight, get a little extra spin without really losing control on your flat balls. And customization wise, I will say 305S, basically perfect stock, doesn't really need anything. For fun, I did add 1 gram at 12 to try to increase my ball speed, get more court penetration, because I do think I was like a half step behind with this compared to my Pure Arrow. Took weight super well. I spent more time trying to dial in this 300S because I feel like it might naturally suit my game a little bit better. I put 4 grams at 12, leather grip, played awesome. And even with this extra weight, to my surprise, stability was better with a stock 305S, but spin generation and racket head speed still comes easier even with this heavier setup. I do plan on spending more time with both of these rackets to really dial things in. I just wanted to move on to my next batch of reviews, but these rackets are not done on the TennCom channel quite yet. So my player recommendations with these frames, these are definitely my 2 favorite rackets of the year so far. Both of them are what I would describe as switchably good, but I think I want to wait for the T-Fight 100 square inch version before I make any hasty decisions. I would recommend the 300S to players who want more of this racket head speed. If you're looking for like a crisper EZO 98 or a VCore 98 or a crisper Extreme Pro, or if you want like a more spin-friendly Radical MP, this is great. I think it would be especially good for like high-level juniors who play with extremely high racket head speeds more naturally. And then the 305S with the dense string pattern I think is great if you're looking for a more connected, stable blade. If you loved the previous version but need a lower swing weight, or if you're looking for a faster, more connected Pure Strike 98, or like a more modern playing version of a Percept 100D, then the 305S would be great. And I actually think I could recommend these 2 rackets to almost anybody. Like, I think they're so good across the board, except for 2 types of players. Number 1, if you have a sensitive arm, I think you should probably avoid these. These are not that comfortable. And number 2, and this is a big and bad one, if you don't like the rectangular grip shape. So my personal thoughts on these 2 T-Fights, I like the 305S more. I think the way that they've set this racket up is a little bit more unique, a little bit more special feeling, and I absolutely love that. Though I do think I see a little bit more potential with my personal game with the 300S if I can figure out how to set it up. If this video was helpful, you enjoyed the channel, you can pick up either of those 2 T-Fights on Tennis Warehouse, Tennis Warehouse Europe, or Tennis Only Australia. That's the best way to support the channel. Affiliate marketing pays the bills, baby. All Tecnifibre needs to do now is switch their horrible grip shape, and I wouldn't mind a trap door so I can add weight a little bit more easily.